Just when it seemed like the NBA and Pacers offseason was going to slow down, the Russell Westbrook rumors speed right back up. We'll cut through all the noise of that trade chatter today. What makes sense for both the Pacers and Lakers? Why both sides would or would not be motivated to get a deal done? Who are the important names to consider in a trade? We'll break it all down today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the West Side Community News. And today, just when you thought the Pacers were done doing interesting stuff this summer, they pop right back to the top of the rumors page, and they are talks to the Lakers about a Russell Westbrook trade. But said talks are also dead for now. Bob Kravitz and Shams Charania in The Athletic reporting that. We'll cut through the report today, what it means for the Lakers and the Pacers, the involved players and parties, what could shift the balance in such a deal. And joining me to do that, he covers the Lakers for the Lakers Exceptionalism podcast and is the founder of the Basketball Index, the greatest data website on planet Earth. Canjis McBasketball, as you know him, everybody. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Tony. I mean, my video's off right now, but I was just, jamming out a little bit to the intro music you got. This is great. Happy to be here.
I am very picky about my intro music. I used to change it all the time, and then I found this one, and I have not changed it since because everybody does that. So I have to keep it this way. So this was an interesting report to me because back in when this first was floated, when NBA insiders were connecting the Lakers and Pacers, like April, right when the season ended. To me, the connection was obvious that Lakers have expensive player, Pacers have cap space, and it didn't make sense for the Pacers then. But now that all the other free agency stuff is settled, that both teams are mostly set in what's going on, there is no more, or at least very little, opportunity cost for the Pacers in their cap space at this point. There's not that many good free agents left. So now these talks make sense again, and that's why it was unsurprising to see this report pop up from Bob Kravitz and Shams Charania in The Athletic. The trade package that they reported was Russell Westbrook and a 2027 first-round draft pick to the Pacers, Myles Turner and HIeld to the Lakers. Those talks are dead because the Pacers wanted more in a trade than they got for Russ and a first-round pick. Before we dive into motivations for each team and what a Russell Westbrook trade to the Pacers would look like, what did you think of that report and that baseline of these are the involved pieces and parties?
I think it makes a lot of sense. And from a Lakers perspective, this has been something they've been trying to do for a bit. And not just with Indy, but looking, Charlotte and OKC and talking to teams trying to find another team that would take Russell Westbrook, one, so they have options, but two, also to get leverage on the Brooklyn Nets, because the prize for them up to this point has been Kyrie Irving. And so trying to have an alternative trade route helps their leverage to lower the price for Kyrie, because right now the Lakers' alternative is we run it back with Russ, and everybody knows they don't want to do that. So this for them is one of those attempts to get some leverage on Brooklyn, but at the same time there are people within the Lakers front office that actually do prefer this route, and I think I'm talking myself more and more into it. I think this would be a really good trade for the Lakers if they could pull it off and could potentially get them into title contention. We'll have to see, health and all that stuff, but I'm not necessarily surprised to see the teams or the players involved. The Lakers have wanted HIeld for a while. They've been interested in Myles Turner for a bit, and of course they're trying to move Russell Westbrook, so it's a natural fit.
I wouldn't say I know everything about their HIeld interests. I don't cover the Kings, but I would wager they've had interest in Myles Turner for longer than HIeld, just based on my Pacers seat in this. The motivations of this are really fascinating to me because, look, LeBron at his age, I think, drives so much of the Lakers' decision making. You know that. I'm just speaking broadly here, and they mostly have these two picks as they're we can get much better pieces for the Lakers. So their motivation is, can we move off of a pick or both picks to get better stuff on our team than Russell Westbrook? Because he was not a good fit for you can speak better to this than I can, but he was not a good fit for that team last year. In total, impact in terms of minutes played and things like that. One of the less impactful players in the entire NBA. And so it seems like, I'll let you speak to that in a second, the motivation for the Lakers would be, we get rid of this bad thing and we get good things. And for the Pacers, who again, the opportunity costs now being much, much, much lower than they were on June 30th when free agency opens up, it's their best way to use their cap space to get assets now. And they don't have to give away players to do that. But if they can rent out their cap space and get some picks at this point in the offseason, they're not even at the salary floor right now. They have to get there eventually. It seems like this is a natural way to do it. So the motivations to me are there for both sides. It's just finding that negotiation part that makes sense. But is there any other part of this that I didn't just describe well for the Lakers perspective?
No, I think that makes sense. I think you covered it pretty well. The Lakers know Russ won't work. They while Indy can walk away from these trade talks and go into next season and have two viable players that contribute to the team, Russell Westbrook, if he's not traded, there's a pretty good chance he's just sent home. The Lakers realize that he's not someone that is going to be contributing to a title contender. He's not a good fit with what they have offensively. Defensively, he's really fallen off, and the team tried to accommodate him, hide him off ball, and that made it really challenging to build good lineups that worked on both ends. So they're as much as Darvin Ham saying we're going to try to make this work, we're going to try these new things, and Lakers fans are excited about that. I don't know that that's going to last all season. They might try him for the first couple months of the year, and if he's not adapting, and a lot of this comes down to him, he's a skilled player, but he hasn't really adapted his game to what it needs to be for him to age more gracefully. And until he does that, it's really hard to win with him on the court. So for the Lakers, he's a player. For Indiana, like you're saying, it's more of a accounting trade than it is you're looking to acquire a player to help the team win.
I definitely think it's an accounting trade, and I did a segment on this on Locked On Pacers last week once the Ayton stuff was settled and you kind of knew what their space situation was. To me, the goals for the Pacers, if they do something like this with the Lakers, you never know how teams are going to go in the future, but it seems like my number one goal, if I was in charge, would be, can I get picks unprotected, completely unprotected from the Lakers? And if it's just one, Buddy and Myles is interesting because that is a positive value combination. You're taking back some crappy money. And then goal number 2 would be, can I get both picks with some protections maybe, or whatever is going on there? And I think that is where some negotiation could be. Have you seen that reported? Do we know if it was an unprotected 2027 offer, or was it just that year that we know?
I don't know that anything's been reported. From what I understand, it was one unprotected pick, and the Lakers do not want to go up to 2. They didn't want to go up to 2 for Kyrie either. So they're looking to find a deal that would make sense for the same price that they've been offering Brooklyn.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because the way I've thought about it, not that Myles Turner and Buddy Hield are useful and resourceful players, but if you're the Lakers, those are your 2 things. If you offer both of those unprotected, that's what you're going for with LeBron for the rest of the time he's with the Lakers, right? So you got to be damn sure that's the right thing, right?
Yeah, this is their last shot to make a trade with future picks with LeBron towards the tail end of his prime. This is their last bullet. And if they do make this trade, maybe you could move HIeld or move Turner in the future. It's not like they're unmovable contracts, but this really would be their last shot. And there's discussion amongst Lakers fans, amongst the Lakers organization as to, is this even worth it? And we would only trade those 2 picks if we know we're going to be a title contender. Because if you're not, and you just kind of want to punt, you can keep those picks and you can probably be better 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now. I'm of the opinion that you have to go for it right now. You got to throw all the chips in the middle of the table. This is your last shot with LeBron. Find a good trade, make it, and you just have to go for it. Because I don't know. Me and many other Lakers fans, we want the team to win titles. It's not about relevance. It's not about making the Western Conference Finals. Title or bust. And you've got a chance here to give LeBron one more real shot. And, if you grab Turner, if you grab HIeld, you're much closer to that Lakers title team from a couple of years ago where the players around them were good connecting pieces that helped prop up AD and prop up LeBron and let them be the best versions of themselves. Since then, we've seen them year after year, end up with a worse and worse roster as they're chasing talented guys or better scorers or bigger names. And I think this would be a move back to a couple of years ago where, Turner's spacing is huge for them. HIeld spacing would be huge for them, and it would just allow them to play better. So this, is their last shot, and I think it's a shot worth taking.
Hey guys, one short little break here so I can talk to you about betonline.net, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games, betonline.net. They also have reviews and news of every league: Major League Baseball, NFL, MLB, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf, all there. And they continue to be the top online resource for all of your sports wagering information, from live betting, in-game betting, scores, podcasts. They have got you covered. The Colts reported rookies for training camp this weekend, and they've got Colts lines up for a ton of their games already over at betonline.net. -8, the Colts favorite in their week 1 matchup against Houston, for example. They're favored by 4.5 in their second game against the Jags. You can get all those lines over at betonline.net. Head over to that website today, or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action happening today at betonline.net, because betonline is where the game starts. The difficulty I have navigating from here, if I'm either team really, is so to me, look, Buddy Hield would definitely be better on a contender than the Pacers. With his skill set, with what he'd be asked to do, he'd still probably put up similar numbers. It would just be like all on threes and just running around the perimeter, a la Doug McDermott with the Pacers a few years ago. But to me, he is kind of a little overpaid. So he's slightly negative in terms of an asset. Not a big negative, and maybe even for the Lakers, whatever. And Myles Turner is certainly a positive asset, although on an expiring contract. So to me, those guys alone are combined worth probably a first, a late first, maybe if you include Buddy and Myles. So that's where it's like, assuming the Lakers, who have scouted very well the last 5 years and can, at the drop of a hat, even post LeBron, lure any player and be good, like one first from the Lakers probably doesn't do it for me for those two guys without Russ. And that's why it's hard for me to figure out how the negotiation should work, because if you're taking back $47 million for an owner that I'd be stunned would be just like, yep, I'm totally cool waiving $47 million to never play for our team. That is where I think the negotiation has to move, is that I don't think a first is enough for those guys without Westbrook. And I can't say that Westbrook is enough, that like you have to include a full another unprotected pick, because then the Lakers probably wouldn't do it. But that's where I feel like the negotiation has to start from, is that those two players are good. Like, they have value in a deal that makes it hard for me to just say, oh, one first, perfect, that's enough. That's not enough. That's not renting out your cap space. That's like almost helping another team. That feels a little Pacers colored glasses to say it in that way. But that's where I think the negotiation falls short, is like there has to be more for the Pacers, even without Westbrook included. Do you feel like that's a crazy way to opinionize that?
I think the way I've been doing the trade math in my head is Turner's probably worth a first. It appears the market, the Pacers look like they can get a first for him, but they're not going to be able to find teams that are able to take on $40 million a year for Turner and HIeld. So if they can move Turner and HIeld, that's a big pro for them. And if they can do that while getting more than a first, like, fantastic. So that's my understanding of what that would look like. Then you throw Russ into the trade mix, and you can make the case that a big expiring deal is a good thing for teams, but it's the type of thing that's good for teams if they're getting off of like long-term bad money. And HIeld is overpaid, but he only has one more year on his deal after this upcoming season, so it's not that big of a deal. So the way I've been looking at it is Turner's probably worth a first. HIeld is good but overpaid, and probably in this situation maybe about neutral, maybe slightly negative. And Russ is definitely a negative asset and worth maybe around a first to get off of. So overall, I think the total cost is going to end up somewhere between like a first round pick with a second or two attached to it, to all the way up to potentially 2 first round picks. And there might be protections on those. We'll see what that looks like. Maybe there will be a pick swap instead of 2 first rounders, but there is some wiggle room in between here. And as we're seeing this play out, I think a really big factor is the fact that there's no trade deadline, like tomorrow or something like that. So there is time, even if the Lakers at the end of the day, gun to their head, trade deadlines in an hour, maybe they would actually give both firsts. I wouldn't expect them to do that anytime soon, given how much, middle ground there is in reality, and, the fact that there isn't an immediate deadline.
Yeah, the deadline spur action part of this is fascinating to me, because, the Pacers offered Ayton was one day before Dwayne Washington's contract would have been guaranteed, and they couldn't have gotten max space really easily. Like, all the time you see a lot of these big moves, there's a deadline or a mandate involved that makes it happen. And barring Myles Turner, coming in and saying, "Hey, you guys tried to sign somebody better than me. I don't want to play here anymore." There's not going to be a mandate or a deadline until like training camp, right? So like I don't know that
Mhm.
we're going to see anything that makes this speed up. Not that that matters a ton for negotiation, but I don't see a reason that this would have like drastic changes in terms of the valuation of what the Lakers are offering for at least 2 months from now. Not that that's super. Go ahead.
Well, I would say for Indy, yes. For the Lakers, the one thing is that LeBron James's deadline to extend his contract is in early August. So
Oh,
he,
oh,
or yeah, so that is an element that I, I would hope they're managing behind the scenes. And if he needs to apply pressure and say, I'm not coming back unless you trade both of these first or do what you have to do to get one of these deals done, I think that would be the smart way to manage it. He is, fully within his rights to say, I'm here, like, let's go for broke. There's, I don't really want to be here long term if you're not going to invest in us winning. That would make complete sense. If we start to see things coming out publicly where they say, all right, well, it's Kyrie or bust, or, this Indianapolis trade or bust, that kind of stuff hurts the Lakers' negotiation leverage at the table. So while
yes.
we may not hear about it, or hopefully we won't hear about it from my perspective, that is another influence that behind the scenes is a very real thing for the Lakers organization.
Well, why would LeBron extend when he's going to play with Bronny? That's obviously the biggest factor at play here, right?
They're going to tag up at some point. We'll see exactly what that looks like. I think he might sign like a 1+1 or something like
That
that.
was a joke, but your 1 second pause did tell me more than anything you could have possibly said there. So I think that you're right. I did not consider the extension part of this. That could change things to early August being important part of this. So in negotiations, I would like to bring up some other names that I think could matter here, if you don't mind.
Go
Before
for
we
it.
talk about picks and protections, Taylor Horton Tucker, not particularly good season last year. How do you feel like you would value him? Because the Pacers could, if they send out both Buddy and Myles, they could take back Taylor Horton Tucker into their space as well. Do you feel like he should have positive value here? He's only 21. Where would you feel like he would swing the balance if he was included in something like this?
If he was the piece you needed in order to get the trade done, the Lakers would do it. I think he's overpaid. He had a good first year. He is one of several examples where the Lakers, rather than carving out a little bit of extra money from their MLE to sign either an undrafted free agent or a drafted player to a like longer term deal, they did a 2-year deal for him and had to make a decision earlier than they wanted to and invested in him long term. He's a clutch client, has those connections with LeBron and AD. So they overpaid on him, and then his growth didn't catch up with the price. So right now he's overpaid, and he's someone that for this Lakers team is a really really tough fit for them because he can't shoot well from the perimeter, and that's really tough when you're going to be the like fourth or fifth scoring option in any given lineup. So he would fit so much better with a rebuilding team where he's able to get the ball in his hands.
Agreed.
He's got some juice as a 1v1 player. He can, run some ball screens. There are things he's good at. It's just not the right fit for this Lakers team. So I think they would be, if that's what you need, they would do that. Now, if he's not traded here, I've heard, maybe they could look to trade him for like Patrick Beverly, perhaps, or maybe he would be a part in an Eric Gordon trade. He doesn't have great value across the league. So I wouldn't expect like, all right, well, if we include him, that means we take off a first round pick from the table.
Right. Yeah, I don't think he has first value, but I do think he is overpaid. But at his age and with successful seasons behind him, perhaps he could have some value in a deal here. And from a Pacers perspective, college teammates with their face the franchise right now, Tyrese Halliburton. How could you forget that the Iowa State Cyclones are a big factor in Russell Westbrook trade negotiation? I'm
Yeah.
going to throw two other names, surprise names at you here. That I
Okay.
told you before the show that there would be surprise names here. Do either of these players, do you think, have enough skill or enough PR as former top 20 picks to encourage the Lakers to potentially include a little more? If Aaron Nesmith or Goga Batadze were coming from the Pacers to the Lakers, would that encourage the Lakers to include anything more or make it easier for them to include 2 first-round picks? Or is that just silly way of looking at it? Because those two guys, to me, I mean, they are maybe in the Pacers rotation next year, but maybe not, given how their free agency went, given who they got in some deals. But they still were former top 20 picks who were cheap and could, in theory, provide the Lakers with some skill or some assets for future deals, which they still need after a Westbrook trade.
So what would pitch them to me? Like what? Why? Where do they fit in? How do they help me? I'm looking at Goga's data. I see an F 3-point shot making, so that's not great. As a stretch big is his offensive role, so that's not a fantastic fit from my perspective. But why should the Lakers value these guys?
PR obviously is the first answer. I can't give you a lot of Neesmith pitch because he's never played for the Pacers. I've only seen him, with the Celtics and in summer league. Shot really well from three in college, and that's why he went in the lottery when he was picked. Over 50% on a ton of attempts his last season at Vanderbilt. Good first year in the NBA as a 3-point shooter. Not a good second year. I'd be curious what your data says about him career-wise as a perimeter threat. Athletic-ish defender, decent on that end of the floor. Like, he is in theory enticing, but the shot has not materialized at all. Similar to Taylor Horton-Tucker, we just talked about ironically. Goga is kind of like an enforcer type at this stage. He was supposed to be a good shooter when he came to the league, and he hasn't been, but it hasn't all connected for him. He hasn't played that much. I don't think either of them would swing the balance very much in a trade, to be perfectly clear. I just would be curious if for the Lakers, and you get two things that you could spin as positive value either now or in a future trade, if that would make them more enticed or appealed to include a second pick, even if it was protected.
I don't think this would be enough for the Lakers to include a second first-round pick. I don't. They're at the point with their roster being filled out where I don't see either of these players fitting a clear need that would help, or I'm not even sure they would get rotation minutes. So that, to me, I mean, they could be worth something. Maybe it's a difference in how a pick is protected, but I wouldn't value them all that much from a Lakers perspective. Though I've been looking at them for 3 minutes, and they'll have a little bit more time to do their research.
At 3 minutes is all you get. You're on the clock. Trade call's about to be made. So let's pivot to this then, because you talk about the protections. If you're in the Lakers seat, would you be more willing to do like 2 top 10 protected firsts or 1 unprotected first? How do you view protections in their role in this deal?
Well, my expectation in 2027, 2029 is that the Lakers aren't going to be good. So at that point, and it's not that they won't have picks. Like, because of the step-in rule, they will have picks all the years in between these. So it's not like they'll never be able to rebuild or things like that. But for them, they're interested in those top players. They've got a great scouting department. They'll probably always be able to buy second-round picks like they have in the past and grab guys like they grabbed Max Christie this year, who they don't expect to contribute this year, but is a good project for them long-term. They grabbed guys like Austin Reeves recently. They've got a good track record of like finding value really late or getting undrafted free agents. So if they lose out on like a late first rounder, I don't think that's all that big a deal for them. I think they would rather go 2 top 10 protected picks than 1 unprotected pick. But that's me guessing.
I think that makes sense to me as well. That's why I said when I did a segment on this that I think the Pacers' goal should more so be a totally unprotected pick more so than like I just use top 10 protections as the example. Now, if it gets like top 5 or something, yeah, maybe you'd pick 2 picks there. But that's where this gets interesting to me and why I'm so curious in what the protections were since they were unreported in that trade, because that would, really kind of sway how I feel about where this stands right now and what makes sense. Because if it's totally unprotected, you have to think about that as the Pacers. Now, let me throw another wrench in for you. What would you be willing to include with Russ if Myles Turner was out of the trade completely? Just Buddy Hield.
Well, I'm not very interested in anymore, tell me. Man, like, I don't think they're going to include either first at that point. Because Turner's the real prize here. Turner, yes. Like, Hield's a good shooter. Hield's not a good defender. He'll play better with the Lakers because he'll be a lower option on the team. He'll be doing, more stuff he's better at, like spot ups and transition and off-screen stuff. He'll be doing less ISO, less pick and roll ball handling, things he's not as good at, but did a lot this most recent year. So he'll be a more efficient, better optimized player, but he's not a huge needle mover for them. Myles Turner, on the other hand, he's 26. They can probably sign him long-term. And with him and AD together, you probably have the best defensive front court in the NBA.
Oh, certainly.
Maybe? I think so. Like, maybe I'm forgetting someone. I think that would be the best front court Be
Giannis
best
and Brook,
defensive front court.
maybe,
Yeah, that's
maybe.
a good call out. They'd be a top tier one for years,
Yes.
and then offensively, it would be the best spacing AD's seen in a while. So we'd be able to see AD play like the monster we know he can play as, but won't be able to do when the paint's been clogged as it has been for most of his minutes for the past couple of years. So Turner is the big needle mover for the Lakers.
The reason I ask that hypothetical question is like I get that this point of the Pacers Turner relationship is a little weird after they potentially tried to sign someone to start in front of him in DeAndre Ayton, and despite years and years of trade rumors, like 5 years of Turner being in trade rumors every offseason, every trade deadline, he's still on the Pacers. But they still have Myles Turner. Like they could trade him in December. They could trade him in January and maybe get that first from someone else anyway. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't have to dive into a Lakers thing to get the first there unless it's unprotected to me because they could still get something else from someone else for him. But HIeld, that is not the case to me. He is a positive value guy on a contender, but not necessarily on just a random other team. Like the Kings were not bummed to send him away at the deadline. So I was just curious because the thing about Turner, to go back to something they just did, there was a lot of talk about oh, they could just sign and trade him to the Suns for DeAndre Ayton. And in retrospect, the Pacers didn't get Ayton, so maybe they should have thought about that more. Or maybe they wanted to force the Suns' hand into doing that exact deal with the offer sheet leak on the first day. Either way, they didn't do that, and they could have. But to me, the whole time I thought, why would they trade Turner for Ayton when they could just sign Ayton and trade Turner somewhere else? And I kind of
Mm-hmm.
feel similarly here that why would they include Turner and only get one first back if it's protected, especially when they could pivot somewhere else and still trade him during the season, but do this trade for Buddy for us and potentially get some value there. But if that's not interesting to the Lakers, then that line of thought sort of falls apart.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, the Lakers should probably make that deal. I just don't know that they would include a first for it. Like we'll give you Russ and 2 second rounders for Buddy Hield maybe or something like that. I don't know. But you make a great point. I think this also, us talking through this, makes me think that the Lakers haven't yet offered an unprotected first. If you think Indy would accept that, is that your understanding? Like that's all it would take? Because that seems really
Um,
low to me from
man,
my perspective. Especially at this
yeah,
stage in the process, without there being like a trade deadline right now, they should be
right.
asking for more.
Oh, for sure. What did Windhorst say? Everything is negotiation that comes out, basically, whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I would. I don't know that one unprotected first would be pretty close, but I'm not Herb Simon. I'm not cutting the $47 million check for a guy who's probably not going to play for my team, and I'm not giving away stuff to do that. But unprotected first are like mega valuable. Protected first, it's obvious, more obvious at least, what value you're giving away or getting. One unprotected first is pretty valuable. You can put protections on it yourself in a future trade, right? You can't do that as easily or as feasibly with other stuff. So I'm not sure. I think I would consider it for sure, but it's a big bet on what you think the Lakers' future is. And if they hear what you say of, oh, they shouldn't be that good, then they won't be bad, but they shouldn't be that good. Then maybe they'd be more willing because then you're basically just saying, okay, Turner's value and the negative value difference between what is Buddy Hield's total contract left now, $40 million. So you're only adding $7 million of value between Buddy and Russ total. That's a rosy way of looking at it, but that total for an unprotected pick from a mediocre team, they'd be okay with. But if they think the Lakers will be good by then, which again, maybe this is a bad way of looking at it, but the Lakers can be good at the drop of a hat. Like they are the Lakers. That kind of risk is scary. That's why a lot of local people have kind of discussed it as, why would the Pacers do this for one first? That's not nearly enough. Why would you help the Lakers? They could get good anytime. That pick might not be any good. So I am really receptive to unprotected picks just as like the value of those in the league right now. But
Mm-hmm.
I get why they would choose to want two firsts instead if that was what it came to.
Yep. And another sweetener the Lakers can throw in is, I think, what is it, up to $5 million in cash each
Oh
season.
yeah, for the difference
So
between Russ and Hield's money, basically. Yeah.
yeah. So they just spent a bunch of cash to buy a second round pick to get Max Christie in the draft, but that was last trade calendar. Last season calendar. This is a new season, so there's money there to be able to help offset some of the cost of bringing on Russ.
Yeah, that makes sense too. So that's another factor that will be interesting to me is like, and maybe I'm overvaluing Myles Turner when I discuss it like that, but I always think because they could get positive value for him elsewhere, it's hard to include him in these bigger trades unless the other net value doesn't make sense. Are there any other machinations that you feel like we're overlooking where, there's like we talked about Talon and two random young Lakers guys, but like Daniel Tice makes a lot of money for the Pacers. TJ McConnell is on the Pacers. The Pacers have stuff they could include. The Lakers have other stuff, I guess. Do you feel like there's any other machinations that make some sense here?
The Lakers don't have many tradable guys on their team. That would be interesting. They don't want to move Austin Reeves. I don't think they'll want to move like Max Christie, who they just drafted. I don't know even if they can move Max Christie that they just drafted, but the cash is a piece of it. I think the one player on the Pacers side that the Lakers may have interest in could be TJ McConnell, just because in this scenario, you'd be going into the season where your two best ball handlers are LeBron and Kendrick Nunn, and then a huge drop off, and then like maybe Lonnie Walker. I don't know. So if they can get McConnell, I don't know how much he would play. I would imagine he'd be in the rotation. I mean, maybe overpaid, but could be a useful piece for this team as well. So if the Pacers are looking to get off of his money, or that's a piece on the table, I think the Lakers would take that on as well.
Yeah, they just signed Andrew Nembhard to this 4-year contract to potentially be a backup point guard at some point. I don't know how McConnell's like the perfect vet for a young team, even if he doesn't play that much. So I think he still has value to the Pacers, but I get where he would fit in with what the Lakers want to do. Tice makes no sense to me, despite every fan wanting to throw him in this, mostly just because he's like the fourth best Pacers pick right now, and he was just money in a Brogdon trade. Outside of that, like it's hard for me to think of a Pacers player, since Neesmith and Batadze are out here, that makes a ton of sense for them to include. Like everyone else is probably in their rotation next year, and either someone that they just signed or someone that's clearly a part of their future. So it's hard to kind of maybe it's Horton Tucker if the Pacers really value him, but it's really hard to expand this in a different way that isn't just, all right, more picks or less protections to me, basically.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's a pretty narrow scope as to what can be in this, and it'll really come down to how many picks and what protections, and then get the Lakers to throw in the cash, because gun to their head, they're going to throw the cash in. So that's what I imagine it'll end up looking like. The Lakers won't have interest in Tice. They have plenty of centers already. There are already Lakers fans saying, why would we need Myles Turner? We have Thomas Bryant and Damian Jones, who I like, and they have Jay Huff, who isn't even like on a two-way or anything, but everybody likes, so might at some point make it to a two-way. So the Lakers have bigs that they like and are interested in. I don't think they would need to add Turner and Tice.
Don't you hate fans when they say stuff like that sometimes? Doesn't it drive you crazy?
All fans are wonderful. No, Lakers fans, there are a lot of them, and I understand why they're very annoying, because within every fan base, you've got some people who aren't, the best. There's always a spectrum of fans. The Lakers fan base is just so big that there are larger volumes of them, and right. The Lakers get talked about so much league-wide that they tend to be in more conversations in people's mentions on Twitter, things like that. So it can be a lot, along with the exceptionalism, which my brand leans into with the podcast. But we approach it more not from a like we're better than everyone, like yada yada. It's more like we expect this team should be trying to win. It's either win or nothing. So somewhat ironic name, but yeah, I get that.
Last small asset thing before I open this up a little bit. Do Lakers have any good second round picks? I mean, most second rounders are crap in general. I'm looking on Real GM. It looks like they have a lot of their own, which I don't know how much of those would be valuable. Less favorable of Lakers and Wizards in 2028. That doesn't seem very good. They have Chicago. They have Chicago's next year. That might be okay. Like, they have any good seconds that I'm missing?
I have no idea. Wait,
you even think about it?
No, I have not been. I have not been considering which second round picks the Lakers have to offer that are more appealing than others. Okay. I don't know. I don't care.
I can tell where you, the GM, would land on how valuable second round picks are.
They're valuable, but I haven't been, spending. I'm not up at night trying to figure out which one's more valuable than another. Because we don't even know. Like, Rob Pelinka doesn't even want anyone on this roster past like next year. So I have no idea what this team's going to look like in a couple seasons. Like, there are people pushing back on this trade just because these two guys would be on the team long term, and by long term they mean more than next season. Hopefully for Turner, and then with HIeld in his contract. So it's a really weird dynamic in LA where they try to keep cap space available to try to entice guys over there. But if you don't have, an infrastructure set up that players can come to win within, it's harder to entice them. So we saw, I know you've mentioned a couple times, the Lakers at a drop of a hat can be good again. We saw year after year after year where they had the cap space and didn't have a good team and nobody wanted to come there. LeBron finally did it after, the team had a bunch of young guys and then they were able to ship off the entire farm system over for AD. But if they're starting from scratch, I don't have the most confidence that they're immediately just going to be able to sign a couple superstars.
That is fair. That is fair. I would say from someone who lives in a small market city, it's watching, I think most fans would feel that watching a team fail for 5 years and then just sign LeBron counts as at the drop of a hat, even if there were a bad 5 years in between.
That's fair. That's fair. There are certain inherent advantages to being in a big market, being, great weather, the beaches, Hollywood, all of the like, business and everything over there. Hey, if Myles Turner comes over, maybe we can get him a nice deal with Lego or Legoland or something
Wow,
like
you
that.
have
We were
done
talking
your
about that on my
research.
podcast.
Look at
Yeah,
that.
we talked about that on my podcast yesterday.
Yeah,
Set the
look at
guy
that.
up. We're
So
going to
I
give you a
actually,
lifetime contract to build a replica Staples Center.
and instead of should they build a Miles Turner statue, should they build a Lego Miles Turner outside of the crypt? The crypt. I forgot about one topic, and I've kept you long. I'm sorry. Do the Lakers care at all about ducking the tax? Because there is a way they could do that in this trade if certain things happen. But if that doesn't matter to them, that's not helpful.
It does. They and this is something that I think gets overlooked a little bit. They recently and historically have been a team that's tried to save money wherever possible. Like for their ownership, this is their baby. This is their moneymaker. They're not. This isn't a little side project like it is for some teams. And in a way, the Lakers are run and operated, and from an ownership standpoint, from and a wallet standpoint, run like a smaller market team or a mom and pop shop. So if they have an opportunity to save money, I think they probably would go for that if it's not detrimental to the team's short or long-term success.
Yeah, that's part of why when I talked about it in a segment on this show last week, I said that like since the Pacers only have to send out like 15 million to make this trade legal, they could get the Lakers like 7 million under the tax in certain trade machinations, but that would not provide the right assets to make this worth it for both teams. That is possible if they
Mm-hmm.
valued that tax ducking, but I don't know that that's a big huge push from the Lakers side. But if it is, then you take Buddy Hield out. Suddenly the picks could be a little different. Do you feel like we've missed
Yeah.
anything here? Is there anything else you want to add into this negotiation discussion, even though we haven't negotiated anything at all?
No, I would just add it to your last point. The Lakers, if they make this trade, it's because they're trying to win right now.
Yeah.
They're willing to trade the picks and they're ready to give it one last shot with LeBron and AD. And this would be a good way to set them up. So I don't think that they would like keep Hield out of it to save money. I don't think that makes sense from their perspective. But I think we've covered just about everything. I don't know exactly what I expect to happen. Again, there's really no concrete deadline anytime soon. The LeBron extension is something that's going on in the background, so that may factor into this. But if he's, either they don't care about that or he's pretty cool with whatever the outcome is, we could see this drag out for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I wonder how that, may impact leverage, because I don't think another team's going to pop out of the woods and say that they want Russell Westbrook, and that, that's going to hurt the Lakers' ability to, try to gain an upper hand here. But I could see if Indianapolis does end up, saying, oh yeah, okay, we would do this trade for one first round pick and then a couple seconds, the Lakers immediately turn to Brooklyn and try to parlay that into lowering the price for Kyrie and then go make that trade instead of this trade. So if they're able to get Indy to move closer to them on cost, it may result in no deal here and a deal over at the other side, potentially.
Fun. Another game of chicken for the Pacers to play after
Mm-hmm.
doing the restricted free agent dance with the Suns. The Nets are just making everything hard on the Pacers. They had to wait for Ayton. They had to potentially just sit around and maybe not, or maybe be a part of 3-team trades. They might just help the Lakers get Kyrie. It's hard being a team with a bunch of cap space and no easy way to use it this late in the summer. I guess I'll just call you Mr. McBasketball at this point in the show. Mr. McBasketball, thank you very much for the time. Where can people follow you and all your work talking about the Lakers, NBA players, and this potential trade, etc.?
I don't think any of your listeners care to get my Lakers takes, but go follow me on Twitter at Tim underscore NBA. I think I'll pitch B-Ball Index a little bit more because
Yes, you should.
we have, I run a site where we have a lot of fantastic data that allows you in, 3 minutes to go quickly look up a player, understand where their strengths are, their weaknesses are, what their impact looks like. I'm a big believer in making data accessible and making data something that you don't need to like know in and out to be able to use. I should be able to look at a stat and understand if someone's good or bad at it without memorizing what a good or bad value is. So we like to use letter grades, we like to use percentiles, we color code things, and we've done what we can to incorporate things like context and shot quality and stuff like that to better, evaluate player skills in various key skill areas. So lots of great stuff over there, tons and tons of tools. Our data and tools package at the website is $5 a month or $52.50 a year, which we haven't really changed in a couple of years. We should probably increase that because there's just more and more and more added in there. But check that out. Lots of great content. It'll be, a whole new way to be able to view the Pacers and other teams around the league. I know it's really interesting and helpful for me when, the Lakers sign someone and I really quickly need to know what the heck, who is Lonnie Walker? How does he play? What is he good at? What is he bad at? It allows you to do that kind of analysis. And then I go through and run through all the film and it's like, all right, well, I just spent 10 hours finding the same conclusion that I found from the data a day ago. So it's at the point where it's good stuff that saves you a lot of time. There's a reason we consult with NBA teams and agents, and hopefully it can add that same kind of value to you and your listeners. So go check out B-Ball Index. It's the underscore B-Ball underscore index on Twitter, and consider subscribing there. Or we also have some free stuff on that site as well.
You will get a cosign from me as a longtime user of the grades page. It's hard to explain to other people for me because I'm a dumb person, but having the skills in the grade setting, I think, is the most easy to understand way of adding value in that space that was missing for a long time. Where it was just like, oh, you are a 68th percentile catch and shoot around screens right-handed guy. I'm making stuff up, but the grades way of putting it is fantastic. Highly recommend from me as well. Thank you again for the time, Mr. Canjis. Everybody, thank you for listening. Tomorrow, we'll be back with a special guest talking about the biggest Pacers storylines for the rest of the off season as they foray into a no more moves coming up for a while kind of thing, unless this Westbrook trade materializes, in which case we will, of course, be covering that. So thank you all a ton for listening. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.